So guys, we are about to watch the absolute state of the MMORPG according to Lazy Peon. Link down below for the video if you want to watch it completely raw. I encourage you to do so if you feel there's anything that I glossed over or missed, if you'd like to watch in more detail or share the post or possibly react to it on your own. But let's go ahead and dive into the post first, and then we'll kind of interrupt as we go and maybe have some thoughts after. Let's do this.
The MMORPG gaming genre, the most unloved, near-forgotten genre that hasn't experienced anywhere near the same amount of innovation, investment, and interest from developers compared to pretty much every other genre of gaming. In this video I go on a bit of a rant and discuss my thoughts on the absolute state of the MMORPG genre as a whole. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. QV is a gorgeously stylized...
I mean, it's one thing for him to get a sponsor. I encourage that. It's another for me to sponsor his sponsor. So, way to go, Lazy Peon, I guess.
Platformers, then click the link in the description below to add QV to your Steam wishlist today. As someone that's been making full-time MMORPG content for about 6 years now, I have to say, it sometimes baffles me that I've still got a channel that even gets views. I felt as though I ran out of MMORPG content to make in 2017, and since then I've kind of been scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to finding new MMORPG stuff to make videos about for you guys. In 2020 it wasn't too bad as there was a lot of MMO news and I was able to go back and do updated first impressions videos for stuff I'd covered years ago.
Keep in mind, this year we have Blue Protocol, PSO2, New World, a Final Fantasy expansion, new content for ESO, new content for Guild Wars 2, World of Warcraft is in a new expansion, the Burning Crusade is coming back again. This is just within traditional MMOs. You then adjust that to action RPGs, things like Destiny, wherever that falls. There's a lot of content that he hasn't addressed, so I think there's a bigger question of like, what specifically about MMOs is he trying to address that he feels within an entire genre means that he's out of coverage, because I don't feel by any means that we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. If anything, I feel that my aspirations for content I want to make is getting larger as I look out at the whole genre with, you know, less of a focus on Final Fantasy XIV and more of its place within MMOs as a whole. There is an enormous amount of subject matter here, and is the same is true of any genre of video game. There is no better time to be a gamer.
But in 2021, like now, I'm really struggling to figure out what MMO themed content I even want to make. When it comes to MMORPGs, I just feel as though the whole genre has so much unrealized potential, and when I look at the top games in the genre, it just feels like they all play it so safe and don't really do any...
Okay, let's back up a little. So they play it so safe, but...
as though the whole genre has so much unrealized potential, and when I look at the top game...
World of Warcraft, Destiny, old school RuneScape could not be any more different. There's a reason Classic exists, because it's so different than retail. Final Fantasy XIV, I will agree, is very similar to World of Warcraft, but Roblox results in a totally different style of content. By the time we move to Elder Scrolls Online, number 7, we have now departed entirely from the Holy Trinity, which we've already done with Destiny 2. We move into Elite Dangerous, which is an odd source to even be in this, because it's almost not an MMO. It's a much more procedurally generated single-player content where you choose to opt in, very Valheim-esque, where you almost opt into these private servers if you so choose. You don't have to play with other people, but you can. But there's people being impacted in a very like Death Stranding, you know, No Man's Sky, something like that, where people are leaving an impact even when you're in your single player. So like, even just within the top 8, there's already 5 or 6 very different ways to play. Especially when you're grouping it already in the same genre. So if you're saying, oh, all these movies are comedies, then yeah, they're all going to be funny. But within that, there's going to be some with a more dramatic flair. There's going to be some that are more slapstick humor. There's going to be all these different styles of humor. And so, like, he's saying these are all the same.
Games in the genre, it just feels like they all play it so safe.
now we get further down in the list, you've got Guild Wars 2, which is more PvP based, has more lateral progression. I look forward to diving into it the very first time this Friday. I've been watching the game for a long time, but I've never played it. Then you move to BDO, which introduces what does a free-to-play look like. Old Republic back to more narrative based, almost like Final Fantasy. EVE Online, the very next one down, almost as sandboxy as you can get. It started out as kind of a spreadsheet simulator with a beautiful overlay and moved into this whole thing where the stories are player generated. They're not put out there by the devs. The devs just create a set of tools and just toss it out into space. And it's up to creators to create, it's up to players to create these stories and these narratives about what happened, about backstab, about betrayal, about expansion, about politics, about battle. And it is this whole story of its own. So,
and don't really do anything to tap into that potential.
Like, there is an enormous amount here. So he's saying, like, he feels he's scraping the bottom of the barrel, but the very next thing he says is, look at all of this.
RPGs, I just feel as though the whole genre has so much unrealized potential.
But they're all realizing a different aspect of potential. And this is just the ones who have made it mainstream. So when you go look at music artists, all the people who are truly experimenting, they may not have made it to mainstream because there may be only so many people that are interested in that style of music until it kind of matures, until it grows into something like a movement. That's where new genres come from, is from the fringe into the mainstream. So even within the mainstream, there is a whole series of ways to play MMOs. And you're sorting by the top ones, right? You're going to the top 40 list and you're being like, wow, I really don't feel there's any musical artists experimenting anymore. Well, that's not what makes it to the top 40. Even if those artists explore something, it's not their number one song. It's something on, the back half of an album where you go, wow, this is really different than their other stuff. And maybe long term it makes it into their style, but that's not their first go round. That's usually, they've been experimenting with that change in their music for a while now. So I don't think that's a fair comparison to say, hey, I checked the top 15 and it's like the majority of players only like the stuff that is the majority of players' taste. Yeah.
And when I look at the top games in the genre, it just feels like they all play it so safe and don't really do anything to tap into that potential. If I was to ask some random person what makes a good MMORPG, I'm going to get some generic answer like a good story, dungeons, raids, battlegrounds. They're basically just going to list me features.
What would you like in a person? I'd like them to be honest, nice, funny. If we're talking about a romantic relationship, maybe I'd like them to be attractive. Back to things like I'd like them to be educated. Maybe what's important to me is that they're decent with money, that they have good moral values. These are all generic answers. So when you ask a generic question, you get generic answers. Once again, like you haven't really explored why there's Untapped. If you ask the general person and you get the general answer, like that's not where the cutting edge lies.
And to me, features are not what's going to help this genre reach its potential. Back when I was in high school, Wrath of the Lich King was...
So, for those of you that don't know, like my professional background before I got into full-time content creation is in sales. And features on their own are taught to you as a so what. If you say to me, this product, this service has a feature, if I can say so what, then you're not done. That's how that was trained to me. If I can say so what, who cares, then you are no different than any other salesperson. You have yet to actually communicate something to me. You've listed something your product or service does, but you haven't finished the thought. And because of that, I can dismiss it. I don't have to store it in my brain as the consumer. And I can go on and I can be barraged by 27 other salespeople, and I can take none of it in, and I can go home and sleep at night and wake up the next day and have processed zero of it. So what you need is a benefit. So when you ask people for a list and you say a feature benefit, you say a feature list, then the feature benefit is the sales tactic. And so from there, what that means is, what that translates to is that the human brain needs to process it into something that has meaning. You can't just say, this person is this adjective. They are this thing. This person is nice. So what? Lots of people are nice. This person became nice because they had an upbringing similar to yours, so it will be easy to relate to them. So we've translated that from they are nice into something where you will better relate as a result. So this game has a narrative it has a heavy narrative focus. That's a feature. It means nothing. So what? Lots of games have narrative focuses. Next. But because of that, The Witcher 3 takes that narrative focus and uses it to build a deeper, more expansive world that will make you feel more immersed than any other game in the genre. Okay, there's my benefit. There's what it's doing. It took a tool, it took a feature, and it turned it into something that means something to me. So a good narrative, for narrative's sake, doesn't matter. If it's totally detached from gameplay, it doesn't ever translate into a benefit. And so it doesn't do anything for the game. It's just dev resources and time and effort spent and players spent, and it's nothing. It's how does it connect? How does it expand? So you have to offer a benefit. So when you say, I want good PvP, why? Because I want that to drive a sense of community. Okay, we're getting somewhere. You associate competitive play, you associate leaderboards, you associate the competitive nature where it is you against a physical other person somewhere in the world as a driving factor behind community. That tells me something about you as a gamer, that tells me something about the kind of games you like, and that tells me about the type of community that's going to develop around a game like League of Legends versus Final Fantasy XIV, where it is more PvE focused. So feature benefit exposes something. It exposes the priority of the product, it exposes the priority of the consumer. It does both things. And when those are married, that's when you have a good relationship. That's when you have a happy consumer. Somebody who aligned with a brand that had a feature, that aligned with a benefit that was in their best interest, that as a consumer, they feel like, you know, I bought this shoe because they take a portion of their money and they donate it to charity, which benefits a group of people I care about. Okay, now I'm two birds with one stone. I'm supporting this charity. And it can sometimes feel like it's just a second feature, but it's about that connection. It's about that moment. So when you say you're asking people what they want from MMOs and you're only getting features, you're asking somebody that doesn't know how to communicate a full idea because maybe they haven't been trained. It's not something we're born knowing how to do. And then you're not following up. So when I was selling semi-custom luxury homes, we have the ability to customize, we have the ability to give you a base floor plan, and it just depends on your needs. When you tell me you need a 3-bedroom, maybe you do. Maybe you just think you do. This isn't what you do for a living. You probably do something where you know a whole lot more about that thing than me, but this is all I'm doing for a living. So I know an awful lot about building a home that's a whole lot nicer than the one I live in. Let me help you. So let's back up and let's talk about the benefit that you're expecting three rooms to give you. Well, we're looking to start a family. Okay, that's very different than, I run a business out of the home and we need the extra space. Okay, that's very different than, well, we really just think that bedrooms offer the long-term resale value within the neighborhood, and we want this home to be something that we can get our value back out of because we intend to move in 5 to 10 years. Okay, like all of those could be a justification for 3 bedrooms. And with an MMO, you have to ask, what is the feature and the benefit? Okay? What is the feature and the benefit? And that's what he's not doing here.
World of Warcraft, I remember doing Winter Grasp, and it was so epic at the time, like hundreds of players all on a big map trying to take control of a castle to then get access to a raid. It all felt super epic, and I remember thinking to myself, if this is what MMOs are doing now, can you imagine what they're going to be doing in 10 to 15 years? Unfortunately, I don't really feel as though we've had a whole lot of progression from that. Sure, we've had slight innovations over the past 10 to 15 years when it comes to actual mechanics and gameplay, action combat. We've got a few different features in MMOs that have been kind of like pushing things forward. But when it comes to MMORPGs improving and innovating on that massively multiplayer aspect, I feel as though we've made next to no progress, and if anything, we've actually regressed from where we were 10 to 15 years ago.
That depends on your definition of progress, right? So we talk about this anytime that Brian or I get where we get spun off talking about the YouTube algorithm. The YouTube algorithm lets the best videos rise to the top. The problem is, and the disconnect is, and where the friction comes from, is that the algorithm's definition of what a good video is based on some back-end analytics that have no bearing on what videos you like to see. They have no bearing on what you define as a good video. And so where that friction gets associated is you always see a type of video that maybe doesn't align with your value doing better than a video that does align with what you want to see from the platform. And so when you say that MMOs haven't progressed, that implies that they haven't been hard at work and that they haven't done anything to improve the game. And that's simply not true. MMOs can have They're capable of supporting more players in a zone at a given time. They have smoother launches now, typically. They support a higher fidelity level of graphics. They support a wider array of hardware across a wider portion of the world than ever before. At this point, we are all but able to run them on our phones, and I think that's right around the corner. We can do things now that we could not do back then. World of Warcraft alone, the layering technology that they call shards, the shards within World of Warcraft can do things that the phasing that was taking place during Wrath of the Lich King, which is the example he showed, simply cannot do. And are there problems with that technology? Yes. And 10 years from now, we'll laugh at those problems because we'll be on to the next technology. But to say that we are not doing things, we can now go back and forth in time. We can now support inventory collections that allow for you to have 500 mounts unlocked on a single character. We have a transmogrification system that simply is better than anything we had way back in the day. We're about to go into the Burning Crusade Classic in World of Warcraft, and that is going to be a stark contrast with some of the things retail can do. We have more content within an individual thing than ever before because we've gotten very good at pumping content out. From this, we've spun off whole other linked franchises. We've built more abilities to network. And so maybe MMOs have not moved in the direction you want. But just because the values that the industry as a whole has decided to pursue are what it is achieving, it is absolutely achieving its own goals, does not mean that those are in line with your goals. And so what you want to see from the franchise not being met is where the friction comes in. That's where reality differs from what your expectations were as a player. And so do I feel sometimes frustrated when something I had hoped MMOs would become didn't come to be? Yes. Does that mean they haven't innovated or progressed? No. It just means that they progressed maybe in a direction that either doesn't mean anything to me, or worse yet in some cases, in a direction that I may feel actually makes the genre worse. But that is my personal opinion. We play a game with tens of millions of players touching it, sometimes millions within a consecutive month, depending on the game. And my view is worth no more or no less than any other one player. And so me in the big ocean of players might just not be in line with what the industry as a whole is deciding its values are.
From my point of view, the entire appeal of the MMO genre is that if you design a game well, you can potentially have infinitely replayable content if you can make player interaction, cooperation, and conflict the focus of the content in a way that's dynamic and make players feel like they're part of a changing world. But the world isn't changing because of some lame, scripted patch. The world is changing because of decisions made by a large group of players. That to me is the direction we need to head in to start realizing.
And there it is. There's his objective. What I want to see is procedurally generated content that is determined by the player base. That is his value, that is his expectation. So when you talk about games like Final Fantasy that have moved into being one of the most critically acclaimed expansions of all time across all MMOs, honestly just critically acclaimed across games in general, it moved the opposite of that direction. It moved that direction very intentionally and very well. But you can see how that does not feel like progress from his definition.
Some of this genre's potential. Let's just go through the top 10 MMOs and analyze how massively multiplayer they really are. You've got World of Warcraft. What's really massively multiplayer in that game? You've got...
What's really massively multiplayer about me being able to queue across all of North American Horde with anybody at any time to fill dungeons, to fill raids? What's really massively multiplayer about me being able to source from hundreds of thousands of players into a seasonal event within minutes? What's really massively multiplayer about me being able to go into unrated battlegrounds with players that are so estranged from me, so random, that I don't even care about them because there's so many that it makes it feel like a lack of community? It's too massive in my opinion. From my definition of what I want to see MMOs move to, World of Warcraft is too big. It's too vast. Because when I queue into a dungeon, I can have a miserable time with somebody. I don't want to invest in them and make them better. I don't have any incentive to stay and say, hey, let's run another one and see if we can get you better at that. Hey, would you like to run that dungeon again tomorrow? I think we can do a lot better on that boss now that you understand the mechanics. Hey, I know you didn't get the drop you need. Do you want to run it one more time and see if we can get that for you? I don't have any reason to do that. I will never see that person again because it's too massive. So yes, we're only in content with 5 people, 10 people, whatever. But the community as a whole is too large. And that's why you get toxicity where people have no accountability. Because I'll never see that person again. I'll never need them again. I can be rude to them because it will never come back and bite me. That's why we're not rude to people in the real life. Because there's some accountability. There's some, I want to treat others how I want to be treated. So I don't want to be rude to my sister growing up because she would then be rude to me. And so we can all make the world a better place on a local scale, and that as a whole makes it better on a global scale. But we've totally fragmented out that first step within MMOs, and through things like Duty Finder, Party Finder, whatever, Group Finder, whatever you want to call it, the systems by which we can queue into group content as a solo person, clear the content with no social interaction with other real players, and then jump out after our objective is achieved, even if that's mid-content cycle, with little to no penalty, regardless of if we play like junk, if we talk trash to them, whatever we do, that is a result of the communities being too massive, not a lack of massive.
Raiding, which is 20-player mythic, dungeons, instanced battleground content, it's not really massively multiplayer, and when I say massively multiplayer, I mean there needs to be a system in the game that makes you care about hundreds or thousands of other players, but WoW doesn't.
I will never care about hundreds or thousands of players. That is the very nature of it. Have you been in a stadium? If somebody drops their nachos 62,000 seats away, do you care? No, you can't. It's not in our DNA. We're not capable of intrinsically, individually caring for individual people in a group that size. Is it cool to be part of something? Yes, that's the fun of FanFest. That's the fun of BlizzCon, conventions, being part of something that is so large that you don't care about the individuals, that it confirms the idea. That's the beauty of that. But it's not about caring about people. It's about being in a collective that cares for an idea. If any one of those people's having a bad day, all 35,000 of us at a convention don't stop and ask them how their day could get better. We don't have that bandwidth. His definitions are just so out of whack with each other that you can't ever be satisfied by a genre that you want to be massive and intimate. That you want to care and have meaning, but you want to be part of something enormous. A real movement. If 250,000 people sign a petition for something, there's no room for nuance in that. There's no room for, okay, we got 75,000 signatures that said they would want this to get passed, but only if this legislation includes this one caveat. But that is actually going to disagree with these 25,000 people over here who specifically agreed to this petition moving forward, assuming the existing framework on this does not change. Like, no. We don't have that bandwidth as a collective. We like a game, we don't like a game. We like the PvP, we don't like the PvP. We don't have the ability to zoom in and start to talk nuance. That happens on a much more individual level. That happens within your individual guilds, that happens within your individual parties. That is something much more intimate. And those things don't have to be disaligned with each other, but they don't have to be aligned with each other either. And so saying that you expect one to drive the other sounds like that's what he's expecting, and that's setting you up for frustration with the entire genre because it's just not built to do that.
Doesn't really have that. A lot of the aspects of World of Warcraft that people enjoy could just be put into a lobby game, really. The only thing that maybe couldn't would be the story. But then again, who really plays MMORPGs for the story when you've got thousands of fantastic single-player story games that are designed to give you a better experience for that? Final Fantasy XIV to me has the same issues as World of Warcraft. People love the game for the story, but for me personally,
who can love the game for the story? Final Fantasy XIV is an example of a game where people just love it for the story.
I couldn't care less about any pre-scripted MMO story. To me, the potential of the genre is unlocked when the story is all about the interactions between players, whether that's through in-game political systems, trade, PvP, figuring out secrets hidden in the game as a community, and being able to have a say in what PvE content is locked and unlocked. No MMO currently really does all of these things that I've just mentioned. Elder Scrolls Online and Guild Wars 2, both decent games, decent features, and they have tried to add to that massively multiplayer aspect. You've got Cyrodiil in Elder Scrolls, which has like hundreds of players. That does feel massively multiplayer, but you don't really care about Cyrodiil that much. Same for World vs. World and Guild Wars 2, you don't really care about it that much. The consequences of what happens in these massively multiplayer environments doesn't really affect the entire world, and it doesn't bring PvP and PvE players together. These features are their own separate thing. The only MMO I've played in recent years that's given me even a fraction of that massively multiplayer feeling that I've been looking for was Black Desert Online, and it was only a little bit. It was just scraping that potential that I feel as though the genre is capable of. Back in 2017, Black Desert Online was at its peak, in my opinion. All the EU servers merged, and there was something like 30 different guilds all fighting to be the most powerful on the server. Every day, multiple guilds fighting in node wars, guilds fighting to take control of castles, which at the time felt as though they had a lot of prestige to them. And for the most part, the majority of the fun from that period of time came from the interactions between the different guilds, seeing what was happening politically, seeing what guilds would die, seeing the new guilds that would rise up. And obviously, Black Desert being Black Desert, I knew it's a Korean game, this fun's not going to last, but at the time I did enjoy it. But I guess what I've been looking for after all these years is an MMO where you feel like the community as a whole, both PvP and PvE players, all have different agendas and are given the tools and systems to change the world in a way where you feel compelled to get involved in the community and have an impact on the outcome.
So I think a lot of that is that he is assuming, even in the statement where he says everybody can play by their own agenda, everybody can play their own way, he's assuming that ultimately that everybody's aspirations will bake into something that is what he wants. Some people want to experience a narrative and then afterwards be in a place to be part of that. Basically, RP is a big one like that, where they continue the story in their own way. There are people that want to share in big epic dungeons, things like that, in the same way we would in a small setting D&D game, but as a video game, so that I can play it with my brothers that live in different cities. I can do that, and we can share that experience together. We can hop into content and we can share that experience. So I think that our goal isn't to change the world. Our goal is to play games with each other. And when I've been involved in things like D&D, my goal wasn't to shape the world. The goal was to explore my own character. And if the world didn't change much as a result of me, that's okay. I don't need to change the whole ocean for my one little area to feel impacted, for my local life to feel like I have some control over it. Even if ultimately in an MMO we don't. MMOs do suffer from a lack of player agency within the story most of the time, because a lot of the times we're funneling towards pieces of content where we all need to be at the same point. To fight the boss, we all need to be at the point where we know they're the boss, we agree that they're the boss, and we're there to fight them. Some of us may agree with why we're fighting them, some may disagree, but we all need to make it to that quest to unlock that piece of content. So I don't know that I think this really comes down to understanding what Lazy Peon's aspirations are for what an MMO needs to be defined as, and what a successful and a invigorating and a rewarding MMO experience is. This video is a lot longer when I sit here and rant about every 2 seconds of it, so I'm actually going to make this into a part 1 and part 2. So we're going to stop here. I will pick up from here, and we will see you in part 2.